M. The Media Project. Driven by data. Driven by technology. Driven by community development. Driven by the need to get results for your project. SM Graves Associates. Delivering real estate development to you, including project management and pre-development services with a keen focus on delivering community-oriented projects. We build profitable projects that respond to the needs of your neighborhood. Join the SMG family. Find us at smgravesassociates.com.
Hello, here we are with another Innovato 2, part 2 this time around, speaking with Byron Batres again of Scrivener. Really excited to have him here to share more of his entrepreneurial venture here in the great Vermont state of 802. With me today, of course, I'm Ryan Munn, one of your co-hosts, and with me today is my co-host, Scott Graves. Scott, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
Doing well. On either side of the mountain, I think it's a little gray and rainy on both sides, isn't it?
It is 48 degrees here, and I'm wondering why I put half my garden in this weekend.
Yeah, a little chilly and wet today.
Bottom line, man, 40s and 50s the next 3 days here in the great state of Vermont. It's rain.
Yeah, it'll come back. So, so with us today is Byron Batres. We had a nice session with him talking about his entrepreneurial adventure up until present here in Vermont. And we're really excited to hear more from you, Byron, about your new venture. Not super new. You've been at it for a little while, but a little bit sort of under the radar, if you will. And you're really just about to kind of take off again from the sounds of it. So thanks for being with us again.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate coming back.
Absolutely. So, so picking up where we left off, you had exited Easy Probate, worked with that acquisition team for a little bit, but also kind of still saw, fertile ground for innovation and had made a pivot to really dig in, kind of start from scratch again in a way of taking all this expertise and background that you have in the space of probate and with software and developing innovative tech to really solve a major problem, I think, that exists today. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, absolutely. So after the sale, obviously you transition and, you do your best to integrate the company. I think for any entrepreneur who's interested in selling, I think it's worth noting most sales and the former founder of the company that's bought, they don't stay very long. Probably for lots of reasons. I think, you think about if you were to interview 100 founders, you probably get 100 different reasons, but they probably revolve around a couple of things. Number one, you're kind of a doer, maybe not a listener and do, right? Not a follower. And ultimately, you probably have a vision that your potential acquirer shares, but once it gets to the execution, there tends to be like a difference. And for me, I have been always super passionate about providing access to people who couldn't afford it. And I think what happens with many companies that are really growth oriented, they just want to grow. And oftentimes in the legal space, that minimizes the number of cases that they're willing to take because, it may have quote unquote hair on them, right? At least they're perceived to be more lengthy, more risk to them, or frankly, they don't understand it, which I think is the case. And so I saw still a need to provide services for those who couldn't have access to legal services. And so what we ended up doing was we launched what would be then and still now the only non-legal litigation financing service. And so
I was going to say, this is probably a good point to bring up. You mentioned it in our earlier conversation, but I'm guessing you had the name in mind as you launched.
oh yeah, I mean, yeah, this, I guess, fun fact, right? I mentioned we had this little, what I like to call bar fight, which is to say, in legal tech, if you're good, the bar is going to come after you, right? They're going to accuse you of practicing law without a license. The bar association will try to shut you down, hence the bar fight. So I had two of those. I would say we won. We were able to close the inquiry with no further action. And we did not materially change our business structure really in any way. So call that a victory. Still costs a lot of money. But it was actually because of that kind of fight. We ended up at Easy Probate start to think of a world where, well, what if we can't help people directly? What if we can't do a do-it-yourself service? What if we had to totally eliminate what we currently were doing, which is direct to consumer, and helping people directly do probate on their own? And so we had embarked on probably a year-long, all during COVID, all 2020. So I had my bar fight start May 2020 and the end of November 2020. So
It's a great time to be in the legal, to be in court.
yeah, well, and yeah, because
Delay.
yeah. So and most courts were shut down, by the way, back then.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we had really started thinking about, so Scrivener, spelled SCRIVNR. Scrivener is the legal exception that allows a non-attorney to prepare legal documents at the request of somebody else and it not be considered the practice of law. And so it really means to be a scribe, right? So you just write down exactly what somebody else told you to do. That's kind of the concept. And so, yeah, we took that name for two reasons. Number one, we wanted to signal to the legal profession that we're not a threat. Easy Probate was, I dare say, aggressively in the legal profession's face and saying, we're going to destroy you. As in, hey, we are teaching people to do it on their own without an attorney. So
It's how you know you have something good, right, Byron?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, if you ever were to Google LegalZoom's unauthorized practice of law fights, they fought, I'm pretty sure it's 16 states, and all but one, they won like hands down, like blowout wins. And one had, North Carolina had a very unique, maybe it was South Carolina, a very unique win for them that had a little more ramifications, but effectively they won. So we knew that going in, and again, Scrivener wanted to be more of a friend to the legal profession because the idea was really, really simple. If you can't afford an attorney and a do-it-yourself option is not for you, for lots of reasons, including some states do not allow it by law, which is weird. I would argue unconstitutional. But regardless, who's there to help you? Right. And so we came up with a way to be able to provide capital to pay for the attorney to then do the legal thing that would typically unlock, protect, or separate money. Right. So at the end of the day, we're not a charity, at least not yet. And we needed an action that has some monetary value at its core that will be unleashed once it's completed. And so there are a lot of examples, like one of the ones that come to mind, one of the first ones that we did was called a quiet title. So quiet title is like, imagine that somebody had verbally agreed to take on a property, but they never transfer the deed. Years go by and that person had paid, every tax bill that came and effectively maintains it, right? And so a quiet title is essentially a lawsuit. It's not quite, it is a lawsuit, but to get a judgment as to who owns the property if that property is in question. So we started to fund things like that. And how do we do it? We typically would learn about the case, then work with an attorney in that jurisdiction that's going through, then do it. We would tell them about the case. If they said yes, we would say yes. And so then we would front the cost of the court fee, the newspaper announcement, if one was required, all the startup costs, including the attorney retainer. So then that way the person who needs to do the action isn't out the money, which oftentimes they don't have, and they're not actors too. But we can then front the costs. And then once that legal action is successful, then we get paid back plus a fee. And so that was the work that we did for 2023 and in 2024. Now that it's 2025, we're taking all of our learnings. We developed probably a 70-ish kind of attorney network across the country.
So hang on one second. I just want to go back there. So 2023, you're seeing a need to fund the process. Help us understand. I mean, banks are out there lending, right? There's all kinds of specialized lending programs out there. Why is there such a gap in this particular area that you're able to jump in there and start a business based on lending into this process? Are there other lenders out there?
Yeah, but nobody lends. I dare you to call anybody who will lend you to do a legal action. The only lending in law that exists is like class action litigation. Have you ever seen the show Better Call Saul?
Yeah, sure.
Remember how he has that big class action lawsuit? Somebody will fund that. So Wall Street is all over that. But like if you wanted to, well, let's just say there's 3 actions that come to mind. If you wanted to divorce, right? And because of the divorce, you and your spouse will separate assets, but you can't afford the attorney or sometimes there's even mediation services available. You can't go to the bank and be like, hey, I guess that you could go to the bank if you personally had the financial wherewithal to qualify for a standard personal loan.
Got it.
Right. But like I mentioned earlier, too many Americans don't. And for a significant percent of minorities, immigrants, people who are non-native speakers, they may not even have a credit score, let alone a good one.
Right.
Not that they're bad risk. It's just there are historical reasons why credit score alone is a bad way to judge someone's ability to either A, pay, be a person like an administrator in a state or a trustee or something like that, or fund like a legal action, which is typically what happens.
There's a couple of things there I want to unpack. And first I want to ask a question, which is, so to me, this sounds like you're helping to adjust time in the legal process such that those that need an extension of time to finance, to pay for the legal services, get the time they need to do that. Whereas the legal action is far more timelier. It has to be done today. I need my divorce to be litigated today. I need, whatever the action in court that needs to happen. And so this allows it to happen in the time it needs to happen, but then the consumer has the time to pay for it over time.
It's not even over time. It's just binary, right? So like once the thing happens, money is unlocked and then that's how we're paid back.
Okay.
So there is no time element to our capital that we provide.
Right. So normal lending folks would have,
Payments.
They'd have payments. They'd have to be able to have the income to cover the payments. They need to have a decent enough score to even get the bank to lend them the money. And then still, sometimes we're talking about a pretty substantial. I mean, I think you said it earlier, $8,000 to $10,000 roughly just to get the process started. That might need another $10,000 to $15,000 to fund other aspects of the process. And that's not a small amount of money to suddenly start making payments on a personal loan, like 2-year note typically. All of a sudden next month you get a payment due, right? So,
Correct.
So there's really no lender that can wrap their head around lending into this scenario where they're like, well, you're going to get paid, but you're not going to get paid until everybody gets paid. And that might be in a month. That might be 3 months. That might be 9 months. That's all.
Term loans don't work that way. Any term loan doesn't work that way.
100%. And again, the population that really needs the help, they can't afford anything, often, let alone be qualified to even be offered a payment.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that was the market that we identified.
And the specific issue here is, of course, that unfortunately we live in a society where justice is often bought and paid for. And so your ability to pay for it is the sort of level or amount of justice you're entitled to. And so I can see how this can I like this for a couple of different reasons. I like the financial model too, which we'll get into. But I also like just the fact that you're just opening up the legal system to a whole, there's a lot of us, even if you're doing pretty well, that deed issue, or, it just might be a bridge too far for you unless you have a service like this. You know what I mean? Because your money is obligated in so many other places,
Yeah, and let's just say you have the funds. Like, do you want to be out with those specific funds for the better part of a year?
Right.
Let's just say you saved up for that family vacation that your kids are really looking forward to, or maybe it's a family reunion or whatever. All of a sudden, the legal action comes in. Yeah, you have the money, but like then that prohibits you from using that money.
That's right.
So there's, even for those of us with means, it definitely is an impactful event because you typically don't get the money back until the legal action is over.
Do I pay my kid's college bill, or do I get my now deceased parents' house out of probate so I can unlock the value in the house? Some years you just got to choose, man.
And so, yeah, those are exactly. So what we've been doing is we've been financing. There's 3 what I call identical legal actions, from the sense of it's binary risk, and it's really more about time than if you get paid back. So inheritance, divorce, and then bankruptcy. People might be asking, like, how can you possibly, if you're bankrupt, that means you have no money. Well, the whole reason you go bankrupt is because you're trying to protect assets in bankruptcy. So there's usually something at the end. And so those typically are what we call binary actions, right? You either are or are not the spouse. You are or are not, the son or whatever. And then bankruptcy, the laws allow you to protect or don't, certain assets in bankruptcy. So it's very binary. It's not about winning or losing. It's about more formulaically doing the process. And that takes time, right? And then once that process is done correctly, it unlocks the legal action, which then has an economic output, which then, of course, we recover the capital. So, yeah. So those are the exact things that we were doing.
And what I find interesting, for one, about this is you found investors as a entrepreneur interested in this. And I'm interested in the measurables that not only help calculate a financial model for this, because I can readily see that, but I'm interested to know who's interested. Like, what is the type of investor interested in this particular kind of online platform? That's interesting to me.
Yeah, so I would say investors, I don't care who you are or what you're truly motivated by. At the end of the day, investment's about providing capital, getting it back with a return. So if you can show that, I think you can get an investor. So let's kind of think about the traditional VC/startup model, right? You have this idea, you think it's going to be worth a lot. Generally speaking, it takes a long time to either A, monetize, or B, kind of break even, let alone produce profits. And then the investor who is interested in your company, the only way they really get their money back, let alone a return, is if and when you sell. Right? And so you're talking a window of like time horizon 5 to 10 years on average, if you're successful. And obviously most startups are not successful. So the few that win pay for those that don't. That's kind of the investment startup game. So part of the innovation that we had was, I don't necessarily want that for lots of reasons. Not that I'm a control freak, but all things being equal, I rather own 100% of the company than not 100% of the company. So the longer you delay before you give up any equity stake, I think the better. And also, this is 2023. So we were not that far from like nobody was investing in anything. So convincing investors to invest in the traditional model was, I would argue, few and far between were having success. People were, but obviously few. And so one of the things that my professional background, which is as a investment advisor, certified financial planner, I thought of, why not go into the private investment fund model where people invest in a vehicle like a fund. Think your, whatever mutual fund, right? You buy into the the process, the fund, and you can get out of the fund without necessarily the fund manager selling their business. And so that's what we did. We were like, we think we can match attorneys with people needing attorneys, and then we would provide private capital to pay for that legal action and provide the private investors a return.
So you found existing private funds, sort of like almost like when you go self-directed IRA, or you created the vehicle.
I created one.
You created the vehicle. Good for you.
I created the vehicle. It's not that hard, I guess, to create it. That is, pay a bunch of attorneys to create the vehicle. So it's a private partnership. So think of this like a hedge fund. In fact, we're organized pretty much like a hedge fund. Technically, there's no definition of a hedge fund. So the hedge fund is a private investment vehicle where private people put their money in and then they do stuff and then they share the returns. So it's a private limited partnership. And then I become the general partner. And so the investors have their allocated deposit, right? And then you typically set a time window when that first investment has to stay there, has to cure, but you need to know how long you're going to have. And then you create a window after that period. How often can they get the money out? Right. So as the private investment manager, you can designate those criteria. So I knew that if we did this right, we would be able to provide substantially above average returns from, say, equities, and provide liquidity, which is the one thing no private investment ever provides, right? Is liquidity. I felt we could do both of those. That was my thesis. And so that's what we essentially set out to prove. Starting in September 23 is when we officially launched the fund. And then we started to finance legal actions.
So what can you share about sort of rough volume size, number of participants in that process? Like, did you start with just one participant, or did you line up a few first? Or did you just go create the vehicle and then start, beating the phone to get those folks in the door?
In some ways, it's probably the hardest thing I had to do because you can't have one without the other, right? I can't have any customers without investors in the fund ready to provide capital. And I can't realistically have investors in the fund without, so it's definitely building the plane as you fly, threading the needle, whatever, saying you want to throw in there, all of those all at once. But we were able to do it. So, I'm definitely known in the legal tech space. And so once certain people realized that I was doing something new, I had a network of attorneys that I had. And so, remember, we were effectively in 2020 interviewing attorneys across the nation and be like, hey, what if we did this? What if we did that? And we would ask them, like, what do you, the attorney, need? And so we started to build for the attorney. So the big lesson I learned at Easy Probate, and then, with my former employer, was, if you could make the attorney the client, you can turn what is kind of a hard business into an easier, but also sustainable business, because the attorney then comes to you with needs. The attorney is your client. They are the ones marketing. They are the ones gathering the client versus direct to consumer, which is so hard, so expensive.
No longer B2C, it's B2B2C.
Yeah, and really then be just B2B. Yeah. Because the attorney is constantly the client, and then you're kind of from a secondhand way helping the end users, as I call them. So obviously the first couple of weeks to months were like crickets, because it's like I'm trying to do both. Fortunately for me, I had a really good reputation within the local community. I mean, don't forget, I literally sold a company and had delivered checks to investors. So it's kind of easy to be like, hey, let's put the band back together. I got this new way to do something similar. Yeah. And so, I was able to get small investments. Minimum investment size was $25,000. I think by October, like 1 month later, we had like $200,000, which is a lot, but also like nothing. And equally, I was already networking and asking potential attorneys. It was like, hey, basically the question was, are you turning down potential clients that are really good clients simply because they can't pay their retainer, because they can't pay the court fee? And the answer was yes, overwhelmingly. And so it was very easy for us to find willing attorneys to be like, yeah, you pay for all the costs and that doesn't affect me in any way. Who would say no to that? So that, yeah, we were able to get some attorneys to buy into the concept, and then it just grew from there.
Yeah. Now, I've got to imagine though, if it was that simple, someone else would have done it already, right? There's complications in this that the reason why someone wasn't lending into this scenario is because there's a lot of at least perceived unknowns, a lot of variables, a lot of skill factors when it comes to, the hundreds or thousands of attorneys in the country that might try to serve this particular area of law. And so how did you address that?
So I would say, if you think about just providing capital, right? So what does the bank do? Like, the bank does not build the car that gets financed if you borrow the money, right? So the bank has to assess risk, and the bank wants collateral, right? And so I think what we were able to do is have a really deep and thorough legal understanding. And by the way, I'm not an attorney, but like, I understood the law. I understood the risk factors of, will this case win or lose? And will we get the money? And more importantly, how long will it take?
With fast-moving and sweeping changes to our economy in the works, we all need to reconsider how our investments are best placed. At Partners in Housing, we believe your money is best placed locally, utilized to increase value and provide stable and desirable housing to your neighbors. Contact Partners in Housing to find out how you can participate in local housing opportunities by joining the Partners in Housing Fund. Look us up at partnersinhousingvt.com or email us at partnersinhousingvt@gmail.com.
And so, because those were the key risks, it eliminates virtually anybody who's a banker, right? Because your typical finance bro, which, by the way, I was one, right? I would know nothing about the legal services other than some peripheral anybody would know from that profession experience, unless I had probated an estate myself, been the executive administrator, had probated 5,000 probate cases at Easy Probate, then, launched the company and sold it and da-da-da. So I would not know how to understand the risk unless I had gone through that experience. And so, out of all the finance bros, my guess is I'm a one of one. Maybe somebody else has been for sure somebody else has been an executor and trustee before, but nobody that I know of has launched like a legal tech company because of it. And so I think I just had a unique space in the understanding and, frankly, willing to take the risk when nobody else had, and had a, friendly network of recently richer people from a transaction that they were directly involved. So, I think those were unique circumstances, but truly it's my thorough, deep understanding of the legal process, how to assess the risk, and then even think of what to many is a simple solution, but again, no one had done it before. So,
now you got a potentially replicable model where your future investors are the same people who are going to benefit from what is a very market responsive product.
Correct. Yeah. So, you asked for numbers. So, off the top of my head, we financed, I think it was like 168 cases between, maybe it was 184. Again, somewhere around there, between September of 23 through December of last year. The fund, I raised a total of, I think it was like 1.5 million. So the fund's at 2 million. And when you add the earnings, and so we were able to earn about a $500,000 return on these transactions. Again, all from lending capital to pay for the legal fee. Once that legal action is done, we get the money back plus a fee. And so we were able to kind of unlock that potential. So that's
like a 25%, 26%.
Yeah, that's assuming that the money all started day one. But if you do a time weighted, which is how you report, we reported a 42% rate of return in that time period. That's time weighted, right? It's because each dollar did not come in. In fact, most dollars came in late. And so started to come in and wrap up.
Just to expand on that too, just to really amplify what that means though, is and I'm sure you maybe have some of these numbers too. I mean, how much dollar volume did you pay in legal fees and services on behalf of clients in that process?
I'll tell you what, let's not even guess.
Not even guess, okay. Because that money earned multiple times. That money paid legal fees. It paid services, bank fees, other costs of the process, and it also unlocked inheritances for the recipients.
Yeah.
Not to mention paid some other services within your company that provided support for this whole process.
Yeah. So here are the numbers. 157 unique cases.
Okay.
We had a total fund output of 2.5 million. So how many times the fund put money? Remember, the total fund assets were like 1.5, 1.3, somewhere around there. Total earnings of 564,240. And so then the actual like weighted all returns were, let's see, where is it?
Drum roll, please.
Sorry, I have, for the jerk amongst my team is, what did Byron name that? Like a name something that I never remember, what the name of the document of the folder is.
Simple nomenclature. That's today.
Because it's a really concept to think about, so growing, it started at 200,000 and over the course of just over a year accumulated to 1.5 million. But in that time frame, created 2.5 million in actual output that's economic activity paying for services and things that went on in this process. And then also, I don't know if you must have the number of how much inheritance that unlocked as well.
Well, I remember it was multiple stuff. We definitely had a expertise in unlocking inheritance, for sure. And so here are the total numbers. So, okay, so total capital raised, total deposits by the end of December was 1,535,000. So 1.5 million. And then we ended up a time weighted value, right, of 42.63% rate of return. So those were the actual numbers. And so within that space, the vast majority needed attorney help within the inheritance space. And within that space, what we ended up specializing in is stopping foreclosures due to death. Right. So again, my natural expertise is probate. My natural bent to help is kind of give power to those who least have power. And in this particular space, the cases nobody wants. I mean, nobody, including my former employer, nobody wanted a foreclosure case with people who don't speak English and have no money. Right. Why is that? Number one, if you're the attorney, the risk of the bank yanking the house away is super, super high. And then you're not willing to take the time, energy, and effort to really put too much effort into it unless you have some reasonable guarantee or a reasonable upfront deposit because you're about to do other work, including pay court fees without that. So, yeah, within that space, stopping foreclosure due to death was our number one kind of element.
Wow. Do you have the number of actual inheritance value total that you assisted with?
I didn't keep that track because every case, when the beauty about what we do is we're not really necessarily financially involved until the end. What I mean by that is, so let's just imagine we're all cousins and our mom had a house with a foreclosure. As soon as we stop the foreclosure, which typically means we're paying the arrears of what's owed, right? And then the house gets sold. And because of our legal acumen, we've been able to position ourselves as an administrative expense. We get paid back once that house is sold. So once the house is sold, we're out. Then the attorney doesn't need us from a financing perspective, and so on. And
That probably reduces your actual liability too for holding on to certain financial information.
well, yeah, but all of this is all public info. Like there's the beauty of what we're doing is it's all public, right? Anything in court is a public document. But yeah, we're not really at risk for the duration. So like imagine later it's discovered the hospital is owed all this money. We've already we're done, right? So it's hard to exactly, what I can say is that the typical foreclosure we stopped, we've been able to retain somewhere between 100 to 175,000 of net equity to the family that would have otherwise been wiped out. Because if you know anything about foreclosures, the way it works is once the bank takes the house, they sell it at auction.
Yeah. And they're going to typically expediency is suddenly the top priority then and not getting the most value.
The only thing they care about is loan value, right? Because anything in excess of loan value, well, then does revert back to the owner.
Right.
But obviously the bidders are smart enough to know, well, hey, let's bid as low as possible. So this is not a truly competitive bid.
Yeah.
And obviously it has gone to its logical conclusion.
As they say, the incentives work in the wrong way.
For sure.
What do you think is what is the growth potential of the company now? And how do you measure that? Like what goes into, determining for you, what goes into determining, here's the market share that we want to go after. And here's what we think the overall size is.
Before you answer, I just want to spit out my math here real quick. So if you said 157 cases and most of them had to do with a piece of property worth 100 to 175,000 of net equity, I just want to put it in people's head. We're talking about $10 to $20 million of unlocked capital, $10 to $20 million worth of homes that also became unlocked in the marketplace eventually once those cases wrapped up in order for other people to buy them and live in them. So that being the seed of what you've got going on right now. Now,
for sure.
Extrapolate on what does that market look like?
So I guess I'll answer that differently. So a couple of things. During this time, we've been working with attorneys. Prior to that, we've been working with attorneys. And so we have this experience of listening and trying to ask them, what is it that we need? Plus, we're on the money side. So because we're providing the capital, you could argue that we have an incentive to make sure that we get the capital back as soon as possible. And so what are attorneys not known for? Working really fast, right? And so over the past year and a half, what we've heard overwhelmingly is, what would be awesome is if I had a entity that could help me automate the work, do some of the things that I don't have time to do. Because the prototypical attorney that we've worked with and the vast majority number of attorneys are typically one, maybe 3-4 people in an office. Right. And which means that they don't have an assistant. If they have an assistant, they're sharing one and everybody's overworked. And so over the course of the year and a half, what we've heard from is they would want an entity that does not compete against them. Right. So Easy Probate was literally a competition. Yes, we had a limited scope attorney plan, but they're we don't want competition. And if you know anything about Google ads, you don't want I remember, I think I told you guys, I had, we had a climb high as a business, right? So we were selling Patagonia jackets. What really sucked is when I was competing with Patagonia, selling Patagonia jackets, right? And so the attorneys are I'm spending too much money on Google ads to have somebody else trying to get the same client for me in this like network kind of marketplace effect. But then that just drives up the cost of both of our people. So they didn't want somebody to compete. They wanted somebody who was really, really good at the process, really, really good at financing, and more importantly, really good at like the financial mechanisms post being administrator, dealing with assets. And so because of that, we listened and we kind of really morphed the offering. And so beginning, I don't know if it's going to be exactly June 1st. So we're relaunching the website. We're going to be redoing our service. But what I can tell you kind of get today is what, May 19th. So May 19th, we're officially putting out into the world that we're going to be offering legal automation to attorneys. We're going to be offering a marketplace-like system where we're going to be able to provide, without competing with them on Google Ads, clients that they are looking for and clients that are looking for an attorney. And then we're going to be able to provide what we call non-legal customer support. Think of like the overflow. How many times have you tried to get a hold of any professional and it's really, really urgent? And then it's like their voice machine or like, hey, so-and-so will get you back to you, right? But then it usually takes days. We want to be that overflow for the attorney, especially when a foreclosure is involved. Why? You're talking often days is the limit between you keep the property or don't. And so we'll be offering that. And kind of our secret sauce is effectively, because I'm so known in this space, really anybody who deals with death ultimately is recommended that they talk to me. And so, and I like to think about like root core problems. So I'm very proud to say that come June, probably more July, we will soon have large enterprise clients that is at the root source, as in the mortgage companies themselves are engaging with us to be that diversion to divert foreclosures away from those divert. I guess technically what we're saying is mitigate foreclosures due to death. That's why I couldn't spit it out. We want to mitigate foreclosures due to death. And the best way to do that is go right at the source, which is who has the foreclosure, who knows that this is going to go into foreclosure in the mortgage company. And so that's who we've targeted as some of our top kind of enterprise clients. And so we solve a business problem for them that creates deal flow to us, which then is deal flow to the attorney partner, plural. And that's a super awesome, circle. Because effectively without us, it's almost like those three entities are pulling against each other. With us, we can realign them and they can all yank together in unison and obviously lift a much bigger burden than if they were doing it on their own.
Really, really incredible. So, I mean, all this experience that you've had helping with specifically the part of the process where you're going in, because a lot of times in the past and in your experience, they're going into foreclosure. And so that's one of the key steps of what you've been doing with Scrivener is mitigating that piece. So presumably you've built relationships in that industry, gotten some referrals within that industry that's really led to this ultimately. And so that's really exciting that you've got this kind of big picture source of business coming in them. Now, I don't think we quite covered it, but you've said before there's basically 4 elements of the process that you're lending into, right? Yeah. Want to break that down?
So we're, again, because we're such experts in and foreclosures is kind of something we specialize. What we've really lent into is the, post-death kind of space. And so number 1 would be starting the legal action. That's everything we talked about, paying the attorney, court fee, all that stuff. Number 2 would be stopping the foreclosure. How do you stop a foreclosure? Well, first you have to start the legal action. Somebody's got to be in charge. Number 2 is you either yell at the bank, to have them delay the foreclosure themselves, or, well, sometimes it's or you have to pay what's owed, right? Not the entire mortgage balance, but like if mom died and she wasn't paying her mortgage, obviously because she's dead, and that took 2 years to get to this point, where the foreclosure is like at the end of the month. In fact, we have a case like that right now where we're about to wire $58,000 to the mortgage company to what's called reinstate the mortgage. Because once you reinstate the mortgage, then the estate has ample time to sell the house.
Okay.
And so, which means you can get it for maximum value and then obviously unlock a lot for the estate. So that's the second type of thing that we do. We finance stopping the foreclosure, which more often than not is paying for the arrears. If you're an attorney, probate is hard for you in so many ways. One of them is you don't get paid until the end, right? So you can be an attorney with like $600, $1 million in future receivables of cases that are some point in their start to end phase. And if you were to wait until the end for every case, it could be 9 to 12 months. Again, without any assistance, which is a long time to, not have cash to pay your employees. And side note, almost nobody finances an attorney. Like literally, nobody provides, even factoring. Factoring is when you, some entity buys your invoice, and then gives you cash. Then
places where like let you get stiffed.
Yeah,
and this is a rural problem that tracks very similar to doctors and what have you, right? Is because of this, small sole proprietorships, legal offices, medical offices, etc., just don't exist anymore, and that typically is more of a burden on rural places, less populated places versus higher population density, because because you can't survive as a sole proprietorship under those circumstances.
And you'd be surprised how often these are known tactics that the trade association does to suppress competition. So now, fun fact, the bar association has actively sued lawyers for advertising. So back in, I think it was 1978, you can Google it. It's Arizona Bar versus, I forget the guy's name. So just Google Arizona Bar preventing lawyers from advertising. And so obviously, who does that help? It helps established lawyers. It hurts up and coming lawyers. So some attorneys sued the bar and said, hey, it's unconstitutional. Well, duh. It's not, of course it's unconstitutional. In the end, and they won, right? So yes, there's a lot of institutionalized, weaponized, I would argue illegality that hurts. But yeah, so anyways, for the attorney, we could provide capital for the attorney, which then allows more entrance into the system, right? And further fostering competition and potentially even pricing. And the last thing that we started to offer was inheritance advances. And normally this is a very shady business. Why? Because most inheritance advances companies charge 100% interest. We don't. Number one, we only help cases that we have an attorney partner in, all those things. But we don't go solicit these areas. We're working with an attorney. That way we have an insight into, what's the term, how fast it would turn around. And we typically charge 30% for our advances, which is very, very high as an inheritance advance, but a third of what, the market is charging. So yeah, those are the four things that we charge. The last one technically is the one we are at most risk, which is why we only work with our attorney partners, because we would have such an insight into the case that we can be like, oh, we know exactly who the creditors are, what are the assets, and then we can do the math as to how much.
Also, just to clarify too, because you're charging 30% on the money. Now, if it happens to take longer, you're just getting lower returns over time. If it takes less time, that's a great return for your fund. But the other thing I want to point out is most attorneys, the way they'll operate is they're going to charge 30% of the money that they get you, whether it's a divorce.
That's only on, no.
You're working from home.
That's not true. That's only for litigation. So we'll get only, which is why, so contingency charging is for litigation. They'll charge you 30. So think of like the mesothelioma ads that you see on TV. It's like, oh, blah, 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 so-and-so and so-and-so law firm. We get you money and no money up front, because they will, and they're able to finance for themselves with Wall Street kind of funds is they're able to finance the legal action because the award they get is very high, 30%. An attorney for probate likely will make 10,000 on average, on the higher end. California is a little bit more just because they have a different structure. But again, no one's really financing them. Litigation, they do finance. Litigation is what you get contingency fees.
Okay. And I guess just the point I really wanted to get across too, though, is that you might be charging 30% on the money needed for the process, whether that's unlocking $100,000 or $1 million in assets, whatever it is. That's not really relevant. The 30% you're charging is just on the money needed.
That's not. It'll take your entire inheritance or whatever. Yeah,
right.
Probably 10,000. We're charging 13, right? And then oftentimes that's a difference of paying rent, keeping someone in school or, whatever the need of the family is. And I'm a financial planner, so I actively try to convince people not to take the money unless they really, really, really have to.
Got it. I think we might need to wrap this up. We're getting long on the time here, but
so then let me just wrap up with our new offering. Because we've learned all this stuff, one of the things that we are effectively doing for attorneys is speeding up the entire process, which means that we can do more cases, they can do more cases, we can help more people. Our money then kind of what we call velocity of money. Our money can do more round trips, which means we earn more for the fund. And it's probably one of the few businesses that the more we make, the more people we have truly helped. And I heard a line the other day that old capitalism was you make money by truly improving the lives of others, right? New capitalism is usually like you make money by destroying oftentimes as many people as possible. That seems to be the modern take on it sometimes. And so we're pretty happy with that. We only work if we're truly helping somebody else, which obviously is a great result.
Yeah. You're unlocking this capital for people that otherwise would be stuck struggling to unlock it or end up paying way too much to get it unlocked. And you're also facilitating a fairly challenging area of law with the tools, expertise, and process to really eliminate as many, if not all, the room for error as possible.
So I just want to end on this because you asked about growth, right? Yeah. So one of the contracts that we just signed that is going to start come July 1st, we are estimating that realistically is worth $120 million in revenue for us. That's just one. Because again, this particular mortgage company has 7,500 deaths per month that they're trying to mitigate from foreclosure. That's just one of them. They're more like, and so obviously there's a lot of room to grow. And so we have a path to hire about 20 more people in anticipation of that July 1 start. So very exciting stuff for us. And obviously I couldn't do it without the team that has been slowly built over the past year and a half. And then pretty soon we'll have a whole new, wave of new team members that contribute to our mission, which is really expanding the accessibility of legal services.
And so this tracks with the bell curve of the baby boomer generation aging out is really what it boils down to.
And that's about, the death boom, for lack of a better term, is about to start. Why? Because the oldest baby boomer is now 80 years old.
Right.
When you think about the peak deaths for a population kind of track is about 80. So most people will die between 78 and 82. That's going to be like 80% of all deaths if you look at a histogram. So yeah, that's what we're positioned in. These numbers, sadly, but naturally will just grow due to that population.
Wow. Incredible. Well, I do appreciate what you're doing. I think that it's really impactful. I think there's a huge benefit and advantage here for investors to look at your fund. How, if an investor wants to get involved, I know it's Scrivener.com, right?
Yeah, Scrivener.com spelled SCRIVNR. That's the cool techie way, but obviously Scrivener spelled correctly will take you to like a pen and paper website. So
Right.
with a little bit of like, we spelled it the cool way because the URL was already taken.
Yeah, right on, right on. And as far as the fund, can they find information about the fund there, or is there another way someone needs to reach out?
Unfortunately, due to the type of fund we have, it is kind of like private. So they can reach out to me. Effectively, you have to kind of like have some medium direct contact. We don't advertise it. We're not allowed. There's a couple rules. But I will say you have to be an accredited investor. So you typically have to have more than $250,000 of income and or $1 million of investable assets outside of your primary residence. So those are two ways to qualify. We are trying to work on a little bit of a broader, again, these returns are high and they're also helping real people. So we think we mesh with like impact investors as well as any investor. But we are trying to potentially see how we can expand it to the masses, but it's actually hard. There are a lot of rules, and rightfully so, that prevents the average Joe to invest in, any private scheme like this.
Right, right. Well, definitely look forward to watching your growth and trajectory over the next few months in particular, and long term, I look forward to seeing the impact of this. Really appreciate you joining us and sharing this story with the Innovative 2 audience. I think it's really important for folks, especially in Vermont, to see how they can have a global impact, right from our home state here. So thank you, Byron, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Find Innovato 2 on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and subscribe to Interchain Live on YouTube for video podcasts. Innovato 2 is a collaboration of Interchain Live and M the Media Project.